Hey guys, it's Kevin and my review for the 2024 musical adaptation of Mean Girls. I don't think I need to get into the plot much for this movie because, I mean, listen, Mean Girls is literally one of the most iconic teen comedies of its kind, but if for some reason you don't know the plot, basically we focus on Katie Heron, and she has recently moved from Kenya, and now she is coming into this new school that is pretty much run by this clique known as the Plastics. They pretty much run the school with an iron fist, especially the leader, Regina George, and when she ends up meeting these two other friends, Damien and Janice, they kind of take her under her wing and kind of give her this mission to infiltrate herself into the Plastics and try to kind of ruin them once and for all and kind of take back everyone else's power. And basically, in doing so, Katie then ends up falling for the ex-boyfriend of Regina, and pretty much from there, hijinks do ensue, and Katie starts to realize that she might actually end up liking this group a little bit more than she ended up. So, Mean Girls, I will be honest, I was honestly really looking forward to this movie when it was first announced. I honestly had a lot of faith in it because of what it was supposed to be. It was announced as an adaptation of the Broadway musical, and as someone who, is very much, into that kind of thing, I've listened to the cast recording for Mean Girls a lot since it came out. I literally did a review of it when it first came out, actually. I haven't seen the show, but I've listened to the cast recording like I have for many occasions. I don't get to see every show, okay? I want to see some shows, I just don't get to. It's fine. We'll get over it. But anyway, speaking to this movie, yeah, I honestly did have a pretty big excitement for it. I thought, okay, there's a lot you can do with this. There's some pretty big differences with the Broadway play and things like that deviates from the movie. So I really did feel like this was going to be its own thing. And then the marketing happened, and they really were just kind of making it as, oh, this is just a remake of the 2004 film. And like, why would anyone be interested in that? The 2004 film is literally one of the best teen comedies out there. I rewatched it recently with my girlfriend, and it still very much does hold up. Yes, there's some jokes that, definitely haven't aged the greatest, but in terms of, its story, its characters, its constant quotable lines, its performances, I mean, it really does check off all the boxes for what you could want in a great teen comedy. So the idea of remaking it is blasphemous, and the fact that that's how they were marketing it did have me a little bit concerned. I was still trying to stay hopeful. I really liked the cast that they had racked up for it, and I really did feel like this could end up being one of the gems of January. Like, this could really turn out to be the Scream or the, like The Missing or something like that, where it's like, recently in January, we've had one really good film that has been like, how the hell did this come out in January? And I really did feel like Mean Girls was poised to be that, especially knowing this was supposed to be a streaming release. I had a lot of faith in this. And look, I will say this, is this a terrible movie? No, it is definitely not. This is in no way a movie that feels like it would come out in January movie, but is it necessarily a good movie? Yeah, no, I can't really say that either. To be honest, I have some very conflicted feelings on this one. There's things I like and there's things I really don't, and I really do have a lot to discuss when it comes to this film, but let's just go ahead and start off with the cast now, shall we? And listen, when it comes to a movie like this that is so incredibly well known, and especially when it comes to the cast, I mean, Lindsay Lohan, Rachel McAdams, Amanda Seyfried, Tina Fey, Lizzie Kaplan, the list just goes on and on. Lacey Chabert, there you go, that's who I'm forgetting. Lacey Chabert, so many just incredible performances throughout that movie. Tim Meadows even, and it just, the thoughts of even trying to recreate that is insane. And I in no way went into this expecting that this was going to surpass those performances, because it's probably not going to, just especially since we didn't know what we were going to get from that movie. I didn't expect to get performances to that level here, and so my expectations weren't really that high, but for the most part, I think almost all the performances really do end up delivering. Let's first talk about Angourie Rice, who does play Katie. I've been a huge fan of her in multiple films ever since The Nice Guys guys. I always just think that she is just a really great lead. She's very charming. She is very likable in that way, and I think she does represent a very good Katie here, someone who, you know, starts off the movie just kind of nerdy and wide-eyed and kind of starts off the film just being really high on life and excited about things. And then as the movie goes on, becomes a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more cutthroat, really starts to embrace her mean girl persona more. And I think she represents all of that just fine. Unfortunately, I do think she is a bit miscast in this movie, because when it comes to this film, you're not just required to be playing this nerdy girl. Like, if that was what you need to do, if this was just a remake of the 2004 film, then yes, I think Angourie Rice gives a fine performance. She does what she needs to do. She doesn't try to just copy what Lindsay Lohan does. She really just put her own spin on the character that I do think works really well. But from a musical perspective, I really just think she fell flat here, because it just felt like, to me, she was nervous. It just didn't really feel like she fit in with the cast that was assembled for this film. I mean, we have some people who have been on Broadway, who have been in musicals, and Angourie Rice is just not known for that kind of thing. Yes, she's had a bit of a stint with music before. She did some song covers for Mayor of Easttown, and she sounds pretty decent, but she doesn't in any way have that kind of vocal, you know, power singing wise. And if she does, it feels like she's just kind of holding back here, and it's just very timid when it comes to her singing. So because of that, it just doesn't really end up quite working, and I found it to be very distracting. So every time I was getting into her performance, she would open her mouth and sing a song, and it just did not deliver in the way that I wanted to. So because of that, I just was not that impressed by her performance here. I really do feel like they need to get someone who was a little bit more experienced to this kind of thing, and I think it would have been that much better. Like I said, I think when it comes to the, you know, regular non-musical aspects, she does fine, but musical aspects, she really does leave a lot to be desired, and that really does end up hurting the film in a pretty significant way, unfortunately. Everybody else here, that's not really an issue, though. Reneé Rapp was absolutely someone I was excited to see. I literally just saw her in concert with my girlfriend back in October, and she was fantastic. Knows how to put on a great show, such a showstopper, and I knew that she was going to be an amazing Regina George because she's played the character before in the stage musical, and you can absolutely tell here. I mean, this is just such a pitch-perfect casting. She is every bit as just kind of tough as nails, and every bit as conniving as you really want Regina George to be, but she also gives her a bit more subtlety in this movie. This is not the Regina George that is someone who feels, you know, this is not the kind of Regina George that is over the top by any means. She actually plays it down a little bit, and I really do think it ends up working out in this film. She gives her a bit more of a vulnerability in this movie, and I really did like what Rapp ended up doing here. I think her performance really did end up delivering. I think that she is just such a star. I want to see her in everything after this film, and I really do feel like this could be the start of her really embracing her career as an actress. I know she wants to kind of be more of an artist now, but I think she absolutely has it in her. I haven't watched stuff that she's done, like Sex Lives of College Girls or things like that, so this is really my first exposure to her as an actress, and yeah, I think she really is pretty great here, and I really did like what she ended up doing in this film. But I gotta say, probably the stars of this film is the combined effort of Auliʻi Cravalho as Janice and Jaquel Spivey as Damien. These two are just fantastic in the movie. They bring so much energy and fun to the movie, and really just find a way of making these characters their own, specifically for Auliʻi Cravalho. I mean, this is, I think, her best performance since Moana. I mean, she really is able to just showcase not just her chops in terms of, you know, singing-wise, because we already know she can sing very well. You know, same with Reneé Rapp. My God, can she sing? But she really gets to show her potential as an actress here. I mean, she gives so many emotional layers to Janice, who honestly becomes maybe my favorite character of the entire movie. I mean, Janice I liked in the original film. I actually do think she does enough here to make that character even better, and I really did love what she ended up doing with her in this movie. Really just plays into Janice's hatred towards Regina, but also getting us to kind of sympathize more with her and and what she's really going through. I just really liked her spin on this character. She's still very spunky and fun, but she also has this emotional sort of layer to her that I thought worked really well. And there's a scene especially at a Halloween party. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the original film, but she just really ended up going for it. And that scene was that much more effective because of her performance. I thought she just did such a great job here. And then Jaquel Spivey as Damien. I mean, again, what a showman, what a showstopper this guy really is. I know he's only really done a Strange Loop in which he almost won a Tony Award for that, which, you know, is definitely nothing to sneeze at, but he is such a star in this film. Every time he is on screen, he's almost always stealing the spotlight. He always does a great job of just having so many quotable lines and things like that. He's just so much fun as this character. And again, Damien works in the original film, but I feel like here he works even better. I really like what they end up doing with him. Janice and Damien kind of take on the role of narrators in this movie, and I think it honestly worked out really well, and I really just enjoyed what both of them ended up doing here. Avantika as Karen is fantastic. She plays into just the comedic sensibilities of this character so well. She doesn't at all try to do what Amanda Seyfried did. She really puts her own spin on this character. She's still just as dumb. She's still just as, you know, barely functioning as a character, but she's still so much fun to watch here. I really love what she did. Just her mannerisms and her facial expressions. She had me dying of laughter throughout this entire movie. I thought she was absolutely hysterical and probably the highlight of this film in terms of comedy. I think even when the lines she had weren't the best, she still delivered, she still got a laugh out of me just because of her delivery. She does such a great job here. I've never really seen her much of anything before, but I really do feel like after this film we're going to see her again. I really like what she did here. Bebe Wood also is very good as Gretchen for what she has. I'll get into her a little bit more. They try to give Gretchen a bit more of a storyline in this movie, and I'll talk about that, but I think for what she did do a really good job. And Christopher Briney, who plays Aaron, is good for what he has. He's decent. I'll talk more about him a little bit more in the writing, but he's okay for what he has here. And then, you know, Jenna Fischer as Katie's mom I thought was also pretty good. And then, of course, there's Tina Fey and Tim Meadows. And all I will say is that don't really expect much from either of them. These are very much just extended cameos. They're kind of just fulfilling the role that they did in the original film, but not nearly having as much of a role in this movie. Tina Fey especially, I felt, was kind of shafted here. If you watch the original film, Miss Norbury has a much bigger role in that film than she does here, where here it feels like she was just kind of here because she needed to be. But overall, I still thought this was a pretty decent cast. I thought they did a good job of finding the right people for these roles, and if they were to get a cast to recreate you know, the 2004 film, I think you honestly could have done a lot worse than the cast you got here. I think they absolutely are one of the best parts of this film. All right, so now let's get to the directing and the writing, which this is really where I get conflicted, because I feel like the directing here from Samantha, Jayne, and Arturo Perez Jr. is actually really good. The one thing I can absolutely say is that they give this film a bit more of a style. They really do a good job of diving into how can we take Mean Girls and really try to adapt it to modern standards. There are frequent points in this movie where they'll cut to like TikToks, or they'll cut to, you know, like Twitter, you know, tweets or things like that, and I thought it ended up working really well. They really did put their own kind of spin on this. It felt very modern in that way, and I feel like that tone works throughout the movie. There's also a lot of different creativity they had in terms of just the way they go about, you know, putting together certain scenes, and I thought that worked out really well. But the biggest issue with their directing in this movie is it feels like they are almost a bit conflicted as to what they really want this movie to be, because it really does end up feeling like two distinctly different films by the end of it. Half of this movie is trying to just be a straightforward remake of the 2004 film. It has all the scenes you expect. It has similar beats. It has the same kind of jokes, and there really isn't that much of a difference, and I'll get more into that with the screenplay. then the other half of this movie is trying to be the musical adaptation, and there's so much more style and creative risks put into that, and I feel like that really is where we get into their directing. I feel like they put a lot of effort into that half of the movie, but the other half of the film is just very sorely lacking. It almost feels like it wasn't directed by anybody. It really just feels like a direct recreation of the original film. And that really just kind of dives into my biggest issue with this movie, in that every time I was enjoying it, I wasn't. Just because it really does just feel like a tale of two halves, pretty much. Like, that really is what it feels like. It feels it kind of has this identity crisis of sorts, and that really does end up sinking my enjoyment of this movie for me. And so, while I do think their directing is strong, it's not as strong as it could have been. I think they needed to lean more on the musical adaptation side of this movie, and I think the movie could have just turned out to be a lot better as is. And so, I do think they have real future as directors. I really was impressed by a lot of the choices they made here, but again, I felt very underwhelmed by how they ended up going about this movie. I think they needed to just really dive headfirst into what can we do differently here to separate it from the original film, and I don't think they did that enough here. And when it comes to Tina Fey's screenplay, this is the other thing that I think was very disappointing, is that Tina Fey had a pretty large role in the Broadway musical. She knows what works, she knows why that stuck out, and it's because there were specific changes made there that made it still feel fresh, made it still feel exciting. Damien, for example, has a much larger role in the Broadway musical than he did in the movie. There's a lot more fleshing out of Gretchen and Karen and basically all the characters that aren't just Regina and Katie. There's just a lot more fleshing out of all of them. And I feel like Tina Fey, she's seen the evolution of this story. She's seen the movie, she's seen the Broadway show, so she's really had a hand in what has worked. And so I feel like, she had a very easy job here in finding a way to take this and just do what worked in the musical. Like, find a way to put your own spin on it. I'm not saying you have to do exactly the same thing as musical, because that's not at all what I'm saying. But you could have found a way to do something different here and put your own sort of 2024 spin on it, and I really don't think she ended up doing that. There's a couple changes that she makes here and there, but other than that, they're very minimal. So the script just kind of comes across as just very copy and paste. It almost feels like she was so married to that 2004 film, she just wanted lightning to strike twice, and so she just tried to do it again here, and it just really did not end up working, unfortunately, and I think that really did end up hurting this film quite significantly. I think the recreations of certain scenes, some of them do work really well, but they always feel like they're paling in comparison to what came before. It never feels like I'm watching this version and it's like, okay, this is the version of this scene that I would stick with. It always feels like, no, I'd go with the 2004 one. That one is just infinitely more interesting. The energy's better. The line delivery's better. And I think the main issue, like I said, is really just the fact that I think they just needed, I think, they really just needed to do something different here, because when the movie does try to go for something different, it really works. Janice, for example, easily has the biggest upgrade in this film. We really dive deeper into why her and Regina fell out, the impact that this had on her. We dive a lot deeper into what she really went through, and it makes her a much more sympathetic and full-fledged character. The original movie, they kind of treat her almost like a joke in the way they go about it, and that's what they were trying to go for then. That's some of the stuff that's kind of not really holding up well in that original film, and here they really do have an opportunity to dive deeper into what this all really meant for her and the impact it had, and it really does end up working. And because that, like I said, I think Janice is probably the best character in this entire movie. She really does have this strong arc that works throughout the film that you latch onto, and I thought ended up coming together very well. The problem is, aside from her, they really don't do a great job with the other characters here. They attempt to dive into some other stuff. Like, for example, Gretchen at first has this arc where she's kind of conflicted. She doesn't really know why she's constantly being abused by, you know, Regina and all her friends, why she's always having to play second fiddle. It kind of seems like she's kind of struggling with, you know, her anxiety and things like that. But the movie doesn't really dive headfirst into it. And it feels like this is just here because it was here in the Broadway play, and we want to try to pay homage to that. And you can pay homage to something without trying to recreate it. And I think that also really does hurt this film. And well, while at first they do a good job of diving deep into her insecurities and what's really, you know, bothering her, they don't really follow up on it. So it just feels like, what was the point? Where did this go? Like, they don't have any idea what to really do with her. And so that doesn't really end up working out to the effect that it does. They changed some things with Katie, where now she has a single mom. And so now there's a bit of a different dynamic there. But again, they don't really utilize it. They don't really do enough with that. So Jenna Fischer, while good in the movie, doesn't really have a lot to do, and you kind of wonder why they even make this change. What was the point of this? Was this just something different they wanted to do and then they didn't know what to do with? And that's just what it feels like. It feels like Tina Fey made some minimal changes but didn't really do enough with. The only, again, change that really ends up working is Janice, because that's the only one that feels fully fleshed out. That's the only one that feels like you had a clear idea of what you wanted to do with this character, and it really did end up working. Other characters, for example, almost have nothing to do in the movie. I talked a little bit before about Christopher Briney and how I think he's decent as Aaron, but don't expect much of anything from him, because Aaron has been completely neutered as a character. Any sort of personality, any sort of, you know, story he had is pretty much gone here. He is basically, you know, borderline a plot device in this movie. Like, that's basically all he has become. And because that Briney just doesn't really have a lot to work with, and I also felt like his performance just wasn't really there at points. There's one scene especially that just really did not impress me from him, and I think it's, again, just because Aaron doesn't feel like a character in this movie. He's really just here to be a conflict, and it really did not end up working out. So again, there's a lot of things I think they could have done differently when it comes to the script in this movie, because again, when it's trying to be a more straightforward adaptation, it just really doesn't end up working. It's really paling in comparison to what we got in that original film, and it feels like it's missing like the clever nature of that movie, because again, it's just trying to recreate it, and at points it really just kind of feels like winking and nodding to the camera and being like, oh, they said that line, you know, like that's kind of what it feels like at points. And so I really do think they needed to utilize the things they did differently, and I just feel like Faye, she just didn't really do that, and that really did end up hurting the film for me. There's even some choices they make that I just don't think fully work out. Like, for example, in the Broadway musical, you know, the movie is narrated by Katie. Well, the Broadway musical changed it up, and Janice and Damien are narrating the whole thing, and this really ends up working out because they narrate the entire film, they give you all the important plot beats, they have some really funny monologues here and there, and they try to recreate that here, but the problem is they're not consistent with it. It happens in the beginning in the film. There's a point in the middle where suddenly they go back to it, but it feels like they almost kind of gave up on it. They're like, oh, this isn't working, so we're not gonna, you know, commit to it that hard. And so when they came back to it, I found it extremely jarring. I was like, oh, we're still doing this? We're still having them narrate? Because I read, you know, I watched reviews where people were saying that they were narrators of this film, and I wouldn't really say that, because especially compared to like Lindsay Lohan's narration in 2004's film, this just does not compare. Every so often they do, but it's just not enough. So it really, again, just feels like another choice that they made that they just didn't really do enough with. And so again, it just really doesn't end up working out. So every choice they make that is new and different, you know, most of them don't really end up working out. And then the things they try to do that are similar to the original movie also don't work, because it just, again, feels lesser than the original film. So it's just a very confusing screenplay where there's a couple things that do end up working, but the majority of it doesn't really end up working out. From a cinematography perspective, I actually do think this film really does deliver points. Yes, sometimes it can look visually flat, but I think especially musical number-wise, it's very creative. There's a lot of really cool things that they do. There's a lot of aspect ratio changes, which I really wasn't expecting. Like I said, sometimes we pan to like TikTok videos and things like that, and I actually thought it was a very clever way to make this stick out from the original film. I thought that they were doing a lot of different things aesthetically with this movie that I actually was quite impressed by. Some of them don't fully work, but I really did embrace the fact that they're not just like trying to, make this make this look visually bland and uninteresting. They actually are trying to do something different, and that's something I did really like in this movie. Let's talk about the music in this film, because I was really excited when it came to the cast recording of this movie, them recreating those songs. There's a lot of songs I really love. And I'll just address the elephant in the room. Yes, they're similar to other musicals I've talked about recently, 13 the Musical. There are a lot of songs that are cut in this movie. And listen, there are some that I'm just kind of petty about not being here. Like, Where Do You Belong not being here really does annoy me, because I think it's such a great introduction to the Plastics and Janice and Damien and things like that. I would have really loved for that to be in here. Jaquel Spivey doesn't really get his own song in this movie. All of his stuff is pretty much just him and Janice, and I feel like that could have been like his shining moment as well, so it kind of pisses me off that they cut that. But then there's some, and that's more of like just a me thing though. It's not really a big deal. But then there's other songs like Fearless, for example, that blatantly feel like they are missing here. There's a scene in this especially where I'm like, okay, where's Fearless? And it doesn't play, and it just feels like it's missing. And I really feel like they didn't do a good job of choosing what songs to keep in. I already touched upon how they tried to do an arc with Gretchen and failed. Well, that's because they, for some reason, kept What's Wrong With Me, which really doesn't have any place in this movie, because if you're not going to have Gretchen get to the place she does in the Broadway musical, why are you even including that song here? It just feels completely unnecessary, and it feels like something they easily could have just scrapped. I mean, yes, Bebe Wood has a really nice voice, but I really don't think that was necessary in the film, and I think they could have easily, removed that and put in a different song that I think would have fit a lot better here, whether it was Fearless, whether it was More Is Better. Aaron's really only time to shine in the musical, really would have given Christopher Briney something to do, but no, I guess we don't want him to sing anything, so we're just not going to give it to him. Stop Even would have been fine, but there's a lot of songs here that were cut from the movie that I just don't really understand, and some of the ones they kept in I don't really understand either. But that's not really the issue here, is that not only do they not have that many songs in this film already, but they've almost completely changed up every single song in terms of the arrangement. All of them sound much more like top 40 type, and they don't really have the Broadway musical type feel that I want them to have. And while some of them, while at first I thought this is just like, not really a big deal, this is just something I'm going to have to get used to, it almost feels like the movie is almost like ashamed of being a musical at points, because the way they incorporate these musical numbers, to be honest, feel very out of place. Like, the movie will just be the regular, Mean Girls that having the quotable lines, having the scene, and then we just randomly cut to a musical number, or we'll cut to a dream sequence in somebody's head, and it just didn't flow organically, and so it really just ended up falling flat. And then the arrangement itself, again, just felt needlessly overproduced in the way that they ended up going about it, or sometimes underproduced. And I really do feel like a big reason for that is having Angourie Rice there, who, like I said, as much as she tries, she's just not a musical theater singer. She's not able to hit the notes that she needs to. There's this, clip going around on Twitter of Revenge Party where, she sings that very flatly, very unconvincingly, and a lot of her songs do come across that way, but it almost feels like because she's in the movie, we need to apply that to everybody, and they just didn't really need to do that. So because of that, it feels like some of them are, kind of not really given the utilization that they need to. Reneé Rapp is a legitimate, star in this movie. Like I said, this is someone who has had a singing career. She's literally on tour right now. And it even feels like with her, they're having her hold back in this movie. We know that she can belt. We know that she can hit the notes that she can because she's played this character before. So why are you not letting her? Someone gets hurt. I wasn't a fan of what they did to that. I don't understand why Meet the Plastics, only Regina is now singing that song when it's literally called Meet the Plastics. It's not called Meet Regina. So I don't understand that choice at all. Just was very confusing the way they decided to go about it. So again, a lot of them just really ended up falling flat for me. Apex Predator is one of my favorite songs in the Broadway musical. Here, it felt like a pop version. It really did. I don't understand why they made the choices they did to that song, and it really did not end up working. There's really only a few here that really ended up working out for me. I thought the cover of Sexy worked really well. Everything they did with that was very fun. It was very creative. They actually utilized the technology very well in that song. I really like what they end up doing with that. And then World Burn is really the only time Regina has to, Reneé Rapp has to, fully embrace her musical talents and really just showcase the range that she has. And I thought that that was such an incredible performance, the way they went about that. But easily, I think the highlights of this entire movie is Revenge Party. It's between Janice, Damien, and Katie. It's when they do decide to start messing with Regina and just trying to make her life as terrible as possible and kind of demote her from the popular girl status that she has. I thought this worked very well. It really utilized, like I said, the movie element very well, but it also didn't try to completely change what worked with the Broadway version. So because that, I end up enjoying it a lot more than I expected to. I really like the sequences they went, and they do a lot of creative stuff with some of these sequences. Like, for example, Apex Predator, I mean, they're literally having everybody acting as wild animals, for example, and I thought that was a really fun idea. World Burn, when Regina is, setting all this chaos to the school, I mean, you literally think a riot is breaking out with the way they're going about it. I thought that was a really cool idea. Something like, say, Sexy, they incorporate all these different technology things I thought worked really well. So there are some really cool elements here. But for every one that I mentioned, there is a Stupid with Love, which now just sounds like a almost a cappella version of what we got before, and it just doesn't really end up working. It almost feels like I'm watching a Pitch Perfect cover with the way they went about it. I don't know, it was really weird the way they decided to go about that one. Again, the songs at points, they just kind of feel like an afterthought. I don't know if this is the case. I have no way of proving this. But it does feel like one of these elements was added before the other, and I don't know which it is. I don't know if this was supposed to be just a musical adaptation, and then they decided to also turn it into a remake of the original film, or if this was supposed to be a remake of the original film, and then at the last second, they're like, well, what if we also made it a musical, kind of trying to attract both demographics? But if that was the case, wouldn't you have promoted it as a musical and not try to trick people into thinking it's a musical because, audiences hate musicals, even though Wonka's literally fucking dominating right now, box office-wise, but whatever, it doesn't fucking matter. Either way, I'm very puzzled by a lot of the decisions made here musical-wise. Here's the thing, if you're not a fan of the Broadway show, you're probably not going to notice any of the things that I'm talking about, but if you do see this movie and you enjoy the musical numbers or you're underwhelmed by it, I encourage you to listen to the Broadway versions and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. You can see you can listen to both back to back, and there's a noticeable difference, whether it's in terms of the style, whether it's in terms of the way these singers are the way they're making them hold back and things like that. It just feels like they didn't fully utilize it, and it just really didn't end up working. It feels very lazy at points, and that was just very disappointing to me. So yeah, those are really my very just long drawn out thoughts when it comes to the musical numbers here. Let's get to the editing, which, the movie is almost 2 hours long, and a lot of the reasoning for that, again, is the fact that this is a musical, but I don't think the movie takes advantage of its runtime at all, because unfortunately, with these musical numbers in there, a lot of the story elements just feel very rushed. Katie's turn, especially from, just this nerdy, mathlete to someone who is a lot more social and, cares more about her status and things like that, and is a lot more selfish. It just doesn't feel as natural as it does in the original film, because we're not given enough time to fully you know, showcase that. We're not really given enough time to understand why she is doing all of this. We're also not given enough time to, you know, throughout the movie, so when suddenly it's Halloween or it's Christmas, it just felt kind of jarring. In the original film, it just felt like, okay, a year is going by, but here it didn't really feel that way. And again, I think it's because the movie just needed to honestly be a lot longer. I think if you're gonna make this a musical adaptation, just go all out. Make it 2.5 hours. Like, have enough time for the musical numbers, but also have enough time for the story. The Color Purple that just came out recently did this perfectly. They were able to seamlessly blend songs, but also keep the same story in there, so it didn't feel like one was compromising the other. This, again, just constantly feels like it's in a battle with itself, and it pretty much affects the entire movie. And yeah, I mean, that's really the best way to sum up the entirety of this film. It's just a very confusing venture, because half of the movie is trying to be something different, and it does end up working out. You know, the stuff they do with Janice, you know, some of the stuff they moved around with certain characters, some of the new lines they incorporate work out really well. The performances are very strong here. Reneé, Rapp, Auliʻi, Cravalho, Jaquel, Spivey, Avantika, all do end up working out really well in this movie. They all do end up really standing out. But then, for everything that works, there's things that don't work. Angourie Rice being severely miscast in this film and just not really being able to deliver in the way others are. The musical numbers feeling very ridiculously down-tempo, and some of them just not even seeming not even sounding remotely similar to what came before in the Broadway musical, and that doesn't really work. Them not embracing the musical enough, it kind of feeling like an afterthought. You know, certain elements they apply from the original movie, and it just really falling flat. So again, it really just feels like they didn't really know what they wanted this to be. They needed to pick a lane between are we doing a musical adaptation or are we doing a remake of the original film? They tried to pick somewhere in the middle, and it just did not end up working out. There were moments that I definitely did have fun. I really did enjoy some of what they were trying to do, but by the end, especially with the way it wrapped up, I just felt severely underwhelmed with the way they ended up going about it. I think there was so much more they could have done here. I think Tina Fey especially really could have utilized some aspects differently, apply some things that worked in the Broadway musical, put your own spin on it, but also you can still honor the original movie without doing the original movie and having the same kind of lines and having the same kind of energy, but then also trying to be a Broadway musical. I think she could have found a way to do something different here, and it just really didn't end up working out. There are attempts to do things differently. There are attempts to try to dive deeper into certain elements, but by the end, it really just feels very much like it just really does feel like a movie that they were just kind of making up as they went along. And so I just found myself very disappointed by the time that it ended. I don't hate this film by any means. There's actually quite a few things I did like about it. It's just a movie I'm very conflicted and frustrated by. So overall, while I really did want to come out saying I enjoyed this remake and I feel like they did what they needed to do, I just found myself really let down by it. So I am going to give Mean Girls overall a C. Like I said, if you're not a fan of the Broadway musical, a lot of the things I have issues with, you're probably not even going to notice. But if you're going into this expecting just a shot-for-shot remake, I think you are going to be surprised by the changes that it makes, but also maybe feeling like it might not be enough. I think, again, they needed to find a way to do some things differently here, and they just didn't really do that aside from a couple changes they made. But other than that, guys, this is my review of Mean Girls. Let me know what you guys saw this movie, all left your thoughts. And like I said, I know I had a lot of just, I know I had a lot of thoughts with this one, and the review might have been a bit all over the place, but honestly, the movie at points can kind of feel like it's all over the place. So honestly, I feel like it's kind of fits in line with what I'm talking about here. So yeah, other than that, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie, all left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye. The river.